Excellencies, heads of states and government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of His Excellency President Mahmoud Abbas, who sends you his warmest greetings and wishes you success at this distinguished assembly, I'm deeply honored to deliver the speech of the State of Palestine. It gives me great pleasure to congratulate the Republic of Senegal and His Excellency President Macky Sall on assuming the presidency of the current session of the African Union. We wish him every success. We also extend our gratitude to the Democratic Republic of Congo and President Felix for the presidency of the previous African Union session. This year's summit is being held under the increasingly important theme, building resilience for food security and nutrition on the African continent, accelerate the human capital, social and economic development. Despite the many challenges the State of Palestine faces, our people assure you that we stand with you in achieving your priorities to the best of our ability, expertise, and competencies. In 2013, this auspicious body opened its arms for the Palestinian people and embraced the State of Palestine as an observer state within your Assembly of States, a show of solidarity with us in our over 7 decades of long struggle to liberate ourselves from the yoke of settler colonialism and military occupation. Of course, the people on the continent of Africa know only too well the devastation and dehumanization that are the hallmarks of colonialism and related system of institutionalized racial discrimination. Your Excellencies, I'm sorry to report to you that the situation of the Palestinian people has only grown more precarious. A few days ago, Amnesty International published a report confirming that Israel is not only guilty for denying Palestinians our human rights, but that Israel is also committing the most grave crimes, the crime of apartheid. From the report, I quote, "Almost all of Israel's civilian administration and military authorities, as well as the governmental and quasi-governmental institutions, are involved in the enforcement of the system of apartheid against Palestinians across Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territory, and against Palestinian refugees and their descendants outside of Palestine. The patterns, prescribed acts perpetuated by Israel, both inside Israel and in the occupied territory, form a part of a systematic as well as a widespread attack directed against Palestinian population, and that the inhuman and humane acts committed within the context of this attack have been committed within the intention to maintain this system and amount to the crime against the humanity of apartheid under both the Apartheid Convention and the Rome Statute. Israel has created in its maintaining a system of oppression, domination of the Palestinians through 4 main strategies. 1, deprivation of economic and social rights. 2nd, segregation and control. 3rd, dispossession of land and property. 4th, fragmentation into domains of control. Your Excellencies, a Human Rights Watch Foundation last year also stated that Israeli authorities had crossed the threshold by committing crimes of apartheid and persecution. Across the Palestinian territories under its control, Israel has demonstrated intent to maintain the domination of Jewish Israelis over Palestinians. In conjunction with that intention, Palestinians have been subjected to systematic of oppression and inhumane treatment. Together, these 3 elements constitute apartheid. When he was Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu said in 2019, Israel is not a state of all its citizens, the nation of the state of the Jewish people only. Currently, 2 million Palestinians live in Israel, are discriminated against. 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank live under direct Israeli settler colonialism. And 2 million Palestinians who live in Gaza have been put under siege for the last 14 years. Nearly 7 million Palestinian refugees suffer from Israeli racist policies that deny them the right to return to their homes. Your Excellencies, B'Tselem, an Israeli Information Center for Human Rights, asserted that Israel is an apartheid state. It concluded that the Israeli regime enacts in all the territories under its control, inside the Green Line, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank, including Gaza, an apartheid regime. One organizing principle lies at the base of the wide array of Israeli policies, advancing and perpetuating the supremacy of one group, the Israelis, over another, the Palestinians. Based on these invulnerable facts documented by neutral bodies, Israel should not be rewarded for should Israel be rewarded for its adoption of apartheid, which targets the Palestinians with discrimination policies related to land, planning and housing, and hindering agriculture and industrial development for the Palestinians. Mr. Chairman, Israel should not be rewarded for deepening this fracture following its military occupation of the Palestinian territory, including Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip in 1967, which has led to the establishment of a military system and separation of legal and administrative system to govern the occupied Palestinian territory that has resulted in the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. In Israel today, you have no partners for peace. We have a government that is only advocating settler colonialism. Israel, the occupying power, should not be rewarded for its unlawful killings, torture, administrative detention, persecution, severe injuries inflicted upon the defenseless Palestinian people and depriving them from their freedoms. Israel should not be rewarded for illegally constructing 280 colonial settlements in the West Bank, inhabiting by more than 700,000 Jewish settlers. Israel should not be rewarded for unilaterally annexing East Jerusalem and pursuing measures to continue to change the status of the demographic composition of the Palestinian territories. Israel should not be rewarded for building the annexation and the expansion wall on the Palestinian occupied territory, deemed illegal by the International Court of Justice. Israel should not be rewarded for its crimes, including the ongoing siege, bombardment, killings, targeting civilians, and destroying infrastructure in the Gaza Strip in flagrant violation of international law. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, Israel should not be rewarded for the imposition of movement of restrictions and the closures of the Gaza Strip, the confiscation of land, the creation of isolated besieged enclaves of Bantustans in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the forcible transfer and displacement of Palestinians, the violation of residency of civil rights, as well as depriving refugees from their rights. Mr. Chairman, today Israel treats the Palestinians as the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. This should stop. Our faith lies in your alignment with principles of truth, freedom, and peace and justice. We are confident in your willingness to support the Palestinian people under Israel's prolonged occupation. Israel should never be rewarded for its violation and for the apartheid regime it does impose on the Palestinian people. As an entity, Israel has progressed from extremism to militarism to colonial expansion. This must stop. Based on your historic stand and your support for the Palestinian right, and bear relevant decisions of the United Nations and previous African Union assemblies, we call for the withdrawal and objection of Israeli observer status at the African Union. We believe that granting Israel observer status at the African Union is undeserved reward. This actually a reward that encourages Israel to continue violating international treaties, breaching all agreements with us. With this reward, it gains impunity and accountability. I am confident in your inner wisdom and judgment. The African Union has constantly resisted colonialism and apartheid. It has continued rejected and condemned Israeli discriminatory policies and practices. The time is right to condemn Israel for its crimes of persecution and apartheid, to end Israeli colonial occupation and enable the Palestinian people to have their right to self-determination towards realization and independence of a state of Palestine on the borders of 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as the capital, and to allow the return of the Palestinian refugees. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, I stand before you today to affirm our position, vision, and peace initiative announced by His Excellency President Mahmoud Abbas during his speech before the United Nations General Assembly on 24th of September 2021. In his speech, our President called for launching political negotiations under the sole auspices of the Quartet based on international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative, leading to a just and comprehensive solution for the question of Palestine, to end Israeli occupation of our land and people toward the independent state of Palestine on the border of June 4th, 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Let me close by wishing you a successful and fruitful summit. We hope that Africa, its countries, and the people will achieve their aspirations for prosperity based on comprehensive sustainable growth, integration and political unity, good governance, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. We hope for the peaceful and secure Africa, where development prevails and exists and is shaped by the abilities of women and youth, helping to make Africa a strong, influential player in the international arena. We wish the Republic of Ethiopia security and stability. Long live Africa with its friendship with Palestine. Thank you and God bless you.
Excellency Mr. Antoine Felix Tshisekedi Tshilombo, current Chairman of the African Union, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished Heads of Delegation, Honorable Ministers, Madam Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Chief Executives of the Regional Economic Committees, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At last we are meeting here physically at the headquarters of our organization in Addis Ababa. The hospitable city, teeming with culture, art, and historical heritage attractions and evocative of the beauty never tarnished by time. Excellency President Antoine Felix Tshisekedi, as you are going to hand over to your successor, may I express my heartfelt gratitude and my warm compliments for the immense work carried out at the helm of our continental organization throughout the past year. I commend the excellent, friendly, fruitful, and intense work experience we have had with you and under your leadership. Excellency Macky Sall, President of the Republic of Senegal, and the incoming Chairman of our Union, I welcome you and wish you every success during your term. Your pragmatism, your sense of method, your determination, your ambitions for Africa raise real hopes that the project initiated by your predecessors will find a new impetus despite the difficult economic and health circumstances. I wish you full success in your chairmanship. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic has challenged mankind deep down and it's its very conscience. We cannot, when we are meeting physically for the first time since the outbreak of the pandemic, avoid asking ourselves about ourselves, our doubts, our anxieties, our concerns for our organization and for our Africa. Two major scourges, that is COVID-19 and terrorism at the continental level, must add to our intrinsic fragilities that the two scourges have exposed. On COVID-19, the champion in this field, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will present to you the essence of our efforts over the past 2 years, as well as the guidelines of our strategy of resistance and future triumph against the devastating pandemic. Two major players will be called upon to play a leading role in this strategy. Africa CDC, whose operationalization is in progress. It will occupy in our institutional landscape the status of a specialized agency, endowed with the autonomy of action dictated by the nature of its mission, while remaining firmly anchored within the continental organization. The African Medicines Agency, AMA, is preparing to play its part in this fight to promote public health, the life and well-being of Africans. The acquisition of vaccines and their manufacture in Africa seem to be the major point of this strategy. The impact of COVID-19 resulted in a contraction in growth of 2.1% in 2020 and an increase in the debt ratio by 10 points of GDP. Africa, due to the insufficiency of external financing to compensate for the low rate of its savings, will not be able to regain the dynamics of its growth before the onset of COVID-19. Active in the mobilization of financial resources for the continent, both by the reduction, indeed, the debt cancellation and by the mobilization of the special drawing rights. Our strategy will focus on the identification, indeed the invention of other innovative sources of financing and reducing the harmful effects of the pandemic on our economies with their well-known structural weaknesses. Our great challenge is and remains in this area the realization of autonomy in the financing of our own development through an energetic fight against illicit capital flows, through the reform of our fiscal policies, and through the acceleration of the establishment of African financial institutions. On the expansion of terrorism, everybody is aware that everybody is aware of the scourge in assuming the unprecedented proportion at the continental level, formerly confined to two small areas. The north of the Sahel and the Horn of Africa is now extending its tentacles to the south of the Sahel, in the center and indeed to the northern regions of the continent. The security situation of the continent today is deeply marked by the metastasis of terrorism and the dangerous resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government. Furthermore, two phenomena establish causal links known. On one hand, very often we find the pretext in the significance, and expansion on the other hand, the necessary fight against the latter produces the illusion that the second is the answer to the proven failures in the fight against the first one. The security situation on the continent calls for a real new approach, which should question our peace and security architecture and its correlation with the new destabilizing factors in Africa. In the absence of this burst of intelligence and decisions, I have serious questions about the future of our flagship project on silencing the guns within the fixed timeline. The dangerous expansion of evil demands stronger international mobilization and a greater inter-African solidarity, which is more fruitful, more concrete, and more active. It is particularly disconcerting to see here and there the vague desire of non-African commitment to support the African countries under attack, while the tenuous ray of African solidarity only allows us to see the immensity of the African paralysis in the face of the burning neighboring houses. The context marked by the two scourges would have made it possible to glimpse the rays of hope if the world were not one where national selfishness, inward-looking attitudes, and the collapse of the values of solidarity and generosity, the fruits of our common humanity, visibly tarnished. The profound and irrefutable truth, however, is that no part of the international community can be reassured about its fate when all the others parts are not. The crisis of multilateralism exists, is real and significant. Obviously, there are many attempts to approach Africa, and this no doubt indicates a growing interest in the continent. But this interest has not yet frankly been translated into a substantial development-centric consideration in favor of Africa. The idea for a time-reflective Marshall Plan for the continent has gradually vanished. I am not far from thinking intensely that such a plan, however necessary, will never come from the outside world. Here, more than ever before, the African leadership is strongly challenged for an awakening for the mobilization of endogenous resources that reveals the immense potential of the continent. There is no salvation except in this African direction for Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the context fairly depicted in broad outlines is nevertheless the framework within which, with the support of most of you, we have been able to deploy ourselves by making, to the best of our ability, use of the assets at our disposal. The redeployment in such a context enabled us to put our finger on the areas of pain that I considered useful to expose to you explicitly and candidly. In doing so, I trust your wisdom, your sagacity, and your immense experience to listen to me on this matter and take the appropriate decisions, those that all the stakeholders of the continent expect you to take. At the forefront of the constraints experienced are the legal and political limits. We have, of course, launched the institutional reform of our organization. It has made it possible to make significant progress towards improving our internal management and efficiency. I wish here to pay deserved tribute to President Paul Kagame, who was champion and architect, as well as the men and women, including the head of the reform unit, who supported him in this endeavor. In spite of the undeniable progress, the reform remains silent on the situation of notorious legal fragility of the Commission and its chairperson. Their powers and competences remain the same as before the reform. How do such powers and competences reduce the leadership role of the Commission? Two major questions constrain the Commission to a rather modest role in the African decision-making process. The first is the narrow reading of the concept of subsidiarity. We certainly need to clarify better the relationship of subsidiarity and complementarity between the regional economic communities and the continental organization. Beyond, however, to declare here and there that the decision of an organ of the AU, in this case the Peace and Security Council on Mali, should be dependent on the decisions of a regional organization, namely ECOWAS. There is really a big gap. It is important that our summit brings here the necessary clarification to avoid any detrimental drift to the functioning of our political and security architecture. The second problem to consider is the question of the sovereignty of states. This is a protective shield against all sorts of abuses occurring in a member country. A restrictive, even dogmatic reading of the intangible principle of the sovereignty of the member states raises an iron wall against any intervention by the continental organization, either as a preventive measure through early warning or as a remedy when the crisis has broken out. We should not therefore be surprised under these conditions to see the Commission being treated here and there as a simple secretariat of the states. Sovereignty is not unique to our organization, and I know it. All international and regional organizations are facing this. But it its force and the restrictive readings to which it is subjected of the AU remain excessive and are detrimental to the full capacity of the organization for initiative and action. This double handicap was not unrelated to the conduct of the Commission to the face of unconstitutional changes of government, a disastrous wave of which has been sweeping in recent times and not only in West Africa. It was, however, clear that such situation was almost inevitable if a certain number of measures and political initiatives were not taken with the desired speed. Solidarity and state sovereignty made any proactive action by the Commission impossible. This situation can only result in a gradual slumber of the role of the leader of the organization at the political and diplomatic levels. On this 20th anniversary of the African Union, a day of renaissance, remembrance, assessment, meditation and projection into the future, I'll call for more inventiveness and the creative spirit to give back to the operational organ of our union greater possibility of action and influence on the political future of our states, in particular when these are in real need for attention. In this effort to awaken the organization, through an inventive reflection of the best modes and models, how can we not question our democratic systems and our peace and security architecture? Have these been able to promote operations ensuring the minimum of good governance, the fight against corruption, nepotism, mismanagement, exclusion? Have they made it possible to fulfill our dream of an Africa where we have silenced the guns? Are we determined enough to reform our Peace and Security Council? Have we mobilized enough efforts for the reform of the United Nations Security Council by opening, when the time comes, a credible corridor for Africa to enter this body in charge of peace in the world? In a word, have our models made it possible to meet the expectations of hundreds of millions of young people and African women burned by the unbearable turpitudes of the political classes with efficiency and ethical values in continual collapse? In other words, have they made it possible to raise the dikes necessary for the easy populism which prepares the ground for coup d'etat and rebellions? There is certainly a vast number of issues, the perceptive, courageous and innovative consideration of which can no longer be deferred. In the constellation of political constraints, how not to deplore the shortcomings in the application of the dual principle of speaking with one voice and African solutions to African problems? We wonder, in many specific cases, what is the purpose of our decisions in this sphere and many others? In how many situations have we not been led to bitter observation of fact, sometimes more humiliating than embarrassing, of the lack of the imperative need to speak with one voice on our own problems and on those that bring us together with our international partners? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, do not blame me for having taken much of your precious time. My understanding of my duty and of the responsibilities which you have honored me with dictates to me the obligation to always speak to you frankly and in all sincerity, while at the same time confining myself ultimately to your great wisdom. Of course, our agenda has a number of issues to which I will refer and address later on. The Palestinian question and the granting of observer status to the State of Israel is one of those specific issues which I will address later. I would like at this juncture just stress two aspects. I would like just at this, that is the first one, the need for a serene debate, far from any attempt to exploit this issue for political purposes, to become aware clearly of the relationship between the unwavering position of the African Union on the cause of the Palestinian people and the recognition of observer status for Israel. Our commitment to supporting the Palestinian people in their legitimate quest for freedom and independence and their inalienable right to the establishment of their own national state alongside the State of Israel in conformity with the relevant decisions of the African Union and the United Nations based on the principle of two states living together in peace, harmony, and mutual respect, and is unchanging and can only continue to grow stronger. The second aspect is my intimate conviction that the observer status granted to Israel in full compliance with the set criteria, which governs the matter, makes it possible to give our organization more latitude and the possibility of playing its role in the promotion of our decisions on the issue, exactly like the Afro-Arab countries, which have made the recognition of Israel an instrument in the service of peace and the quest for the best ways and means for the confirmation of the principle of two Palestinian and Israeli states living in perfect harmony. The second specific issue relates to our partnerships. The proliferation of these partnerships, a sign of interest in Africa and the dynamism of our continent and its organization, no longer allows us to engage in them without really revisiting our approaches to such partnerships. It is imperative to focus them on concrete, transformative and integrating mega projects in 5 priority areas of peace and energy, infrastructure and energy, climate change, innovative development financing, training of youth, and empowerment of women. These projects currently under execution require the mobilization of substantial financial resources to achieve the structural transformation of our economies. This is the only way to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth capable of cushioning the impact of shocks such as financial crisis, the effects of climate change and pandemics. I hope that the summits that we are planning this year with our partners will be decisive moments for the implementation of a vision of international partnerships of Africa with the rest of the world. Such a redefinition of our strategic partnerships constitutes, in my view, a decisive lever for the role of Africa in the design of a new world order in harmony with our hopes. I thank you.
Your Excellency, Alexei Tshisekedi, President of the Democratic Republic of Congo and outgoing Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency, Macky Sall, President of the Republic of Senegal and incoming Chairperson of the African Union, Your Excellency Moussa Faki Mohamed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished ministers, commissioners, Excellencies, ambassadors, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me welcome you all to the land of origins on behalf of the people and government of Ethiopia. Let me also take this opportunity to celebrate our reunion in Addis Ababa after a 2-year disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. In this regard, I wish to express my appreciation to the entire leadership of our union, and particularly to His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa for providing exemplary leadership in our collective response to the challenge of the pandemic. Over the past 2 years, we have struggled not only against the human cost of the pandemic, but also an inequitable system of vaccine distribution, arbitrary travel bans, border closures, lockdowns, and misinformation about the value of vaccines. Most importantly, as Africans, we have also learned that cooperation and collaboration is vital, not only for our health, but also for our collective survival. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our union has committed to undertake ambitious plans designed to transform our continent and create the Africa we want. We want a prosperous Africa based on sustainable and equitable development. We want a politically united continent that aspires to fulfill the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of an African Renaissance. Fulfilling our aim of birthing the Africa we want through robust implementation of Agenda 2063, and its flagship project will require us to make extraordinary efforts collectively. Our theme for 2022 is nutrition and food security. Over the past year, acute food insecurity in Africa has increased by over 60%. The effect of COVID-19 continues to aggravate our fragile economies. Floods, droughts, desert locusts, and other climate-related natural disasters have increased food insecurity for millions of our citizens. With 60% of the world's arable land in Africa, it is of utmost importance that we need to use our natural asset to maximize agricultural output and feed our people without reliance on external assistance. In the past 2 years, Ethiopia has made substantial investment in intensifying in summer wheat production through irrigation. Our farmers have been able to control and manage production factors to maximize yields using irrigation. Nationally, we have attained production over 20 million quintals of irrigation wheat farmed on over 500,000 hectares. This has generated nearly 60 billion birr in income to our farmers. These efforts are generating great results and will, in the imaginable future, begin to contribute to our food security and self-sufficiency, despite the climate variability our region is confronted with. One of the toughest challenges we face in Ethiopia is dealing with the effect of deforestation. While a century ago, Ethiopia's forest coverage was 35%. Over the past 2 decades, our forest coverage stands at just 4%. We believe afforestation is one of the most effective ways of climate change mitigation. Beginning in 2019, we launched a major reforestation initiative under the slogan, Green Legacy. Our aim was to plant 20 billion trees across the country over the course of a 4-year period. In a mere 3 years, we managed to plant 18 billion seedlings. And this year, with the Green Legacy Initiative in its final year, we will not only meet our national target, but plan to surpass the target by reaching 25 billion. Additionally, through this initiative, we have sent seedlings to neighboring countries to inspire regional efforts. If we can collaborate to spread the message of Green Legacy in the continent and implement measures that maximize our food security and self-sufficiency, we will be able to guarantee our citizens the basic necessity of life without reliance on charity. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa's voice on the world stage needs to be heard loud and clear. Africa must also be represented on important international bodies. Today, more than 7 decades after the creation of the United Nations, Africa remains a junior partner without meaningful input or role in the system of international governance. This is particularly true of the United Nations, where Africa lacks representation on the Security Council and is underrepresented in a variety of ways. It is the right time to reform and revitalize the United Nations system to reflect current global realities and ensure that it is a more representative and equitable body. Only fair representation and transparency in those institutions can usher in a just era in multilateralism. Consistent with our Esluini Consensus of 2005, we should collectively insist that Africa's reasonable request for no less than 2 permanent seats and 5 non-permanent seats in the UN Security Council be adopted. Equally important is Africa's media representation on the international stage. Africa is often portrayed in international media negatively. The endless representation of the continent troubled by civil wars, hunger, corruption, greed, disease, and poverty is demeaning and dehumanizing, and likely driven by a calculated strategy and agenda. This stereotypical and negative media representation of Africa not only disinforms the rest of the world about our continent, but also shapes the way we see ourselves as Africans. Telling our own stories and shaping our own narratives must be our top priority. In this regard, I would like to propose to this august body the establishment of an African Union Continental Media House. This media house could be organized to provide authoritative news and information on our continent, fight disinformation, promote our collective agenda, and offer opportunities for Pan-African voice to be heard. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, peace and security are critical issues affecting our continent. Despite the African Union's intensive engagement in addressing peace and security challenges of the continent, guided by the maxim, African solution to African problems, new and complex problems that undermine our unity and sovereignty continue to emerge. In this respect, the past year was particularly challenging to our continent in general, and my own country, Ethiopia, in particular. Ethiopia's challenge was internal in nature and a matter of maintaining law and order. But resolution of our internal matters was made exceedingly difficult by the role played by external actors. I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all for your support, solidarity, and understanding as we underwent these trying times. As you are aware, despite the intransigence of the other side in this conflict, my government has taken a variety of measures to minimize the loss of life and destruction of property. We have implemented unilateral withdrawal from conflict area and used force that is necessary to ensure law and order. As a gesture of goodwill, we have released high-profile suspects with a view of creating a conducive environment for peace. We shall leave no stone unturned in our search for peace in our country. Consistent with our commitment to peace, to peaceful resolution of conflict, we have recently launched an inclusive national dialogue platform with formal legislation. Our commitment to pursuing lasting and durable peace in our country shall remain steadfast. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest lesson that Ethiopia has learned over the past year is that without the solidarity of our African brothers and sisters, our existence as a nation would have been at great risk. This affirms the wisdom of our forefathers and foremothers in their dream of Pan-Africanism. The old saying is true: united we stand, divided we fall. Today, we stand proud and tall as Africans in the shadow of those who struggled to liberate and unite Africa. Our steadfast unity is the anchor and the foundation of our Agenda 2063. A continent of 1.3 billion people, a substantial percentage of them young and dynamic, will drive Africa's prosperity and pull it out of poverty as we set forth in our Agenda 2063. Also, our Continental Free Trade Agreement holds the greatest promise of effectively realizing continental integration and development. The potential for increased intra-Africa trade, free movement of people, and investment and self-reliance is a beacon for Africa's renaissance. Instead of depending solely on trade out of Africa, our collective effort to boost intra-Africa trade will protect us from the fluctuation of global economic and political change. Similarly, the potential for continent-wide tourism remains untapped. It is part of aspiration of 5 of Agenda 2063, which seeks to create an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. The more we know each other, the more we are able to cooperate and resist the force that seek to divide and undermine us. You may recall, a mere 2 months ago, efforts were underway by some in the international community to create an atmosphere of fear to drive expatriates out of Ethiopia and discourage travel to Ethiopia. Those efforts were not successful and will not be successful. Indeed, many fellow Africans joined the Great Ethiopian Diaspora Homecoming Challenge and proved to the world that Ethiopia is a safe and culturally rich tourist destination. As a key pillar of our national reform agenda, tourism potential within Ethiopia has been augmented greatly in the past 2 years, with many natural endowments developed to complement the historic and cultural heritage that already exists. Ethiopia remains open and welcomes all of our fellow African brothers and sisters. Finally, let me once again convey the warm welcome of the Ethiopian people and reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to do everything in our power to continue to create an enabling environment for the African Union in our collective efforts to deliver the Africa we want through robust implementation of Agenda 2063. God bless Ethiopia. God bless Africa. Thank you for your attention.
ተመልካቾቻችን ይሁን ከበጀርባ እንደምታዩት ስብሰባቸውን ጨርሰው ወጥተዋል ማለት ነው። በ35ኛው የአፍሪካን ዩኒየን የመሪዎች ጉባኤ ላይ በዚህኛው ለዛሬ ጨርሰዋል ማለት ነው። ቅድም እንዳያችሁ ብዙ ንግግር ነበረ። የክቡር ፕራይም ሚኒስተር አብይ አህመድ ንግግር ነበረ። ከዛ ኋላ ደግሞ ሁሌ እንደተለመደው በአፍሪካን ዩኒየን እንደሚደረገው ተሸጋግሯል ማለት ነው። የቸርማን ቦታው በማናው የተሸጋገረው የሳውዝ አፍሪካ ፕሬዚደንት ለዲሞክራቲክ ሪፐብሊክ ኦፍ ኮንጎ ፕሬዚደንት አሸጋግሯል ማለት ነው። በዛም ብዙ እቅዶች እንዳሉ ብዙ ስራዎች እንደሚሰሩ ተነጋግረናል ማለት ነው። ቅድም እንደሰማችሁ ደግሞ የሚዲያ ቦታ አፍሪካ ውስጥ ምን ይመስላል የራሳችንን ሚዲያ የራሳችንን ዘገባ መፍጠር እንዳለብን ክቡር ፕራይም ሚኒስተር አብይ አህመድም ተናግረዋል ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ስለሱም የምናወራ የሚሆን ነው ማለት ነው። እንደምታዩት ጨርሰናል። አሁን ሰብስበው እየተነሱ ነው። በኋላ ደግሞ ራት እንዳለ ተነግሮናል። በጣም የሚገርም ራት እንደተዘጋጀላቸው። ስለዚህ እሱንም ደግሞ ሄደን ወደ እናንተ ምንዘግብ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። የአርትስ ቴሌቪዥን ናችሁ ነው ከኛው ጋር ነው።